My name is Olivia, and last year, during what should have been a celebration of 7 years of marriage, I received a phone call that shattered my entire reality. As I sat across from my husband Michael at the restaurant he'd chosen for our anniversary dinner, his phone rang. When I handed it to him, he fumbled and accidentally put it on speaker, and a woman's voice echoed between us. "Is it done yet? You promised to tell her tonight. You promised to leave her." In that single moment, with candlelight flickering, across Michael's horrified face, my perfect life collapsed like a house of cards. 7 years ago, if you'd asked me to describe my life, I would have used words like blessed, secure, and on track. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I had just turned 30, with a stable career as an art curator at a respected gallery in Denver, a charming townhouse in a neighborhood with tree-lined streets, and I'd recently married Michael Rivera, a man who seemed to embody everything I'd ever wanted in a partner. Michael and I met at a charity auction where I was coordinating the art displays, and he was representing his architectural firm, which had donated design services. He approached me near a display of local photography, commenting not on the obvious landscapes, but on a small, easily overlooked piece showing hands intertwined. "It speaks volumes without saying a word," he'd said. And I remember thinking how refreshing it was to meet someone who actually looked beyond the surface. Our courtship was a whirlwind of thoughtful gestures and deep conversations. Michael never forgot details, from how I liked my coffee, oat milk, 1 sugar, to the name of my childhood cat, Pepper. He sent flowers to my office on random Tuesdays just because, and volunteered to help catalog new acquisitions at the gallery when we were understaffed before a major exhibition. By our 6-month anniversary, I was certain I'd found someone truly exceptional. "He's too good to be true," my friend Natalie warned over brunch one Sunday, skepticism evident in her voice. I'd laughed it off, attributing her caution to her recent divorce. "Not everyone has a hidden agenda, Nat," I'd replied, stirring my mimosa. "Some people are exactly who they appear to be." Michael proposed on a snowy evening in December, after leading me through a trail of clues that culminated at the very spot where we'd first met. He'd somehow convinced the gallery owner to let him recreate the charity event setup, complete with that same photograph of intertwined hands, except now it hung beside a new companion piece he'd commissioned, showing our hands recognizable by the small birthmark on my wrist. "I want to intertwine my life with yours," he'd said, dropping to one knee, "to build something beautiful together, moment by moment, day by day." How could anyone say no to that? Our wedding was intimate but elegant, an art gallery transformed with soft lighting and minimalist floral arrangements. We wrote our own vows, and Michael's brought tears to everyone's eyes. "I promise to be your constant in an inconstant world, your shelter in every storm, your truth in a sea of uncertainty." I remember watching his face as he spoke, thinking, how lucky I was to have found someone so genuine, so present, so devoted. After the wedding, we settled into a rhythm that felt both comfortable and exciting. Michael's career at the architectural firm flourished. He was made partner in his 5th year, something he attributed to my unwavering support and the stability of our home life. My own work at the gallery expanded from curation to development, allowing me to nurture emerging artists and build community partnerships. We talked about children, deciding to wait until we'd been married at least 5 years, a timeline that seemed sensible and allowed us to focus on our careers while enjoying our time together. We traveled when we could, seeking out hidden art scenes in overlooked cities. We renovated our townhouse, with Michael designing a studio space where I could pursue my own artistic endeavors on weekends. We hosted dinner parties where conversation flowed as freely as the wine, and our friends often commented on how we still looked at each other like newlyweds. It wasn't perfect, no relationship is, but our disagreements were minor and resolved with communication rather than conflict. Michael worked late sometimes, especially when his firm was pitching major projects, but he always called to check in. There were moments when I sensed a distance in him, a preoccupation that seemed to pull him away even when we were in the same room. But they passed quickly, and I attributed them to the natural ebbs and flows of a long-term relationship. If I'm being honest with myself now, there were signs I chose to ignore. The business trips that increased in frequency during our 5th year of marriage, the new password on his phone that he claimed was a company security requirement, the way he sometimes seemed to flinch when I touched him unexpectedly, the mysterious charges from florists and jewelry stores that never resulted in gifts for me, but which he explained away as surprises for his mother or sister. Marriage requires trust, I told myself whenever doubts crept in. And trust means not questioning every unexplained receipt or late night at the office. By our 7th anniversary, we had what appeared to be a perfect life. Our careers were thriving. Michael had recently secured his firm's biggest contract to date, designing a sustainable mixed-use development downtown, while I had been promoted to creative director at the gallery. We'd finally started discussing children more seriously, even looking at properties in neighborhoods with better schools. From the outside, we were the couple others aspired to be, successful, supportive, still in love after 7 years. Michael suggested we celebrate our anniversary at Altitude, an exclusive restaurant perched on the 30th floor of Denver's newest skyscraper, a building his firm had worked on, though not as the primary architects. "It's time we enjoyed the view from the top," he'd said, making the reservation weeks in advance. I'd spent hours choosing the perfect dress, a deep burgundy number that Michael once said brought out the golden flecks in my eyes, and even splurged on a professional blowout for my usually unruly curls. That evening started beautifully. Michael arrived home early, bringing with him a small box from my favorite local jeweler. Inside was a delicate gold bracelet with 7 tiny stars, one for each year of our marriage. He fastened it around my wrist, his fingers lingering longer than necessary, and for a moment I saw something in his eyes that I couldn't quite identify. A sadness, perhaps, or regret. But then he smiled, and whatever I thought I'd seen vanished so completely, I convinced myself I'd imagined it. The restaurant was everything a special occasion deserved: attentive service, spectacular views of the mountains, a sommelier who seemed genuinely invested in finding the perfect wine to accompany our meal. Michael seemed distracted, checking his watch and his phone with increasing frequency as the evening progressed, but I attributed it to work pressure. His firm was in the final stages of a major proposal, and I knew how personally he took his professional responsibilities. "Everything okay?" I asked after he checked his phone for the 3rd time during our appetizer. "Just making sure Thompson sent in the revisions for the Westlake proposal," he replied, sliding his phone into his jacket pocket. "Tonight is about us. No more distractions." But distractions continued to intrude. Michael's phone buzzed repeatedly with text notifications, which he ignored with increasing tension evident in the set of his shoulders. When he excused himself to use the restroom, I noticed he took his phone with him, something that had become a habit in recent months but which I'd never questioned. Upon his return, Michael seemed different, more present somehow, as though he'd made a decision. He reached across the table for my hands, and for a moment I felt like we were back in our early days, when his touch still sent electricity through my veins. "Olivia," he began, his voice soft but serious, "there's something we need to discuss." His phone rang, cutting him off mid-sentence. He grimaced, pulling it from his pocket to silence it, but I could see a name on the screen. "Rachel." "You should take it," I said, withdrawing my hands. "It might be important." "It's not," he insisted, but the phone continued its persistent ring. "If it's about the Westlake project?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. It's not about Westlake, he snapped, an edge to his voice I rarely heard. The phone stopped, then immediately began ringing again. Rachel, whoever she was, wasn't giving up. Just answer it, I said, increasingly uncomfortable with his obvious agitation. Or give it to me and I'll tell her you're busy. No. The sharpness of his response startled me, but he quickly softened. I'm sorry. Here, I'll turn it off. But as he reached for the phone, I impulsively grabbed it, irritated by the intrusion into our special evening and curious about his uncharacteristic reaction. In the brief struggle that followed, Michael's finger accidentally hit the answer button, and then the speaker icon. Michael? A woman's voice filled the space between us, clear and intimate in a way that made my skin prickle. Michael? Are you there? Is it done yet? You promised to tell her tonight. You promised to leave her. The restaurant around us continued its gentle hum of conversation and clinking glasses, but at our table, time froze. I stared at Michael, waiting for him to laugh, to explain, to reveal this was some elaborate misunderstanding. Instead, his face drained of color, and in his eyes, I saw not denial, but guilt. Pure, unmistakable guilt. I can't talk now, he finally said into the phone, his voice barely above a whisper. You're with her, aren't you? The woman, Rachel, sounded angry now. You swore this time would be different. You swore you'd finally choose us. Us. The word hung in the air between my husband and me like a grenade with its pin removed. Rachel, stop, Michael pleaded, but it was too late. I'm tired of hiding, Michael. I'm tired of being your secret. Tell her about us. Tell her about the baby. I felt the world tilt beneath me, the restaurant's spectacular view blurring as tears filled my eyes. The baby. Not just an affair then, but a life, a future, being built parallel to ours. A future that apparently now required the demolition of mine. I stood up, my napkin falling unnoticed to the floor, my untouched dessert a sad testament to celebrations cut short. Without a word, I walked away from the table, away from the husband who had just been revealed as a stranger, away from the 7 years that now seemed like an elaborate performance rather than a marriage. Behind me, I could hear Michael calling. My name, his voice desperate and pleading, but I didn't turn back. I couldn't. In that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that whatever came next would require every ounce of strength I possessed, and looking at him, at the man I had loved so completely and who had betrayed me so thoroughly, would shatter what little composure I had left. As I stepped into the elevator, a cold clarity washed over me. The life I thought I had, stable, loving, true, had never really existed. It had been a beautiful illusion, convincing in every detail, but fundamentally false. And now, on what should have been a night of celebration, I found myself facing the most painful question of all. If the past 7 years weren't what I thought they were, then who was I? And what would I become in the aftermath of this betrayal? I don't remember leaving the restaurant. My body moved on autopilot while my mind splintered into 1,000 jagged pieces. The valet must have called me a rideshare because suddenly I was in the back seat of a stranger's car, staring blankly at the city lights blurring past the window. You okay back there, ma'am? The driver asked, his concerned eyes meeting mine in the rearview mirror. I managed a nod, though nothing about me was remotely okay. My phone buzzed relentlessly in my purse, Michael, no doubt, trying to explain, to justify, to rewrite what I'd just heard with my own ears. I silenced it without looking at the screen. Actually, I said, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears, could you change the destination? I need to go to the Parkview Hotel downtown instead of the address I gave you. I couldn't go home. Not to the townhouse where Michael and I had built our life together, where every room held memories now tainted by the knowledge of his betrayal. Not to the bed we'd shared while he was building a separate life, a family, with someone else. The hotel lobby was mercifully quiet at that late hour. The receptionist took in my tear-stained face and evening dress with professional discretion. "Just one night," I said, sliding my credit card across the counter. "Of course, Ms. Rivera," she replied, and I flinched at the name I'd taken so proudly 7 years ago. "Actually, it's under Olivia Bennett," I corrected, using my maiden name for the first time in years. It felt like trying on clothes that no longer fit quite right. The room was standard luxury hotel fare: neutral tones, crisp linens, impersonal artwork on the walls. I kicked off my heels and sat on the edge of the bed, finally allowing myself to look at my phone. 17 missed calls from Michael, 23 text messages. "Olivia, please let me explain. It's not what you think. Come home so we can talk." "At least tell me where you are. I'm worried about you. Please, Liv, please." The last one had come in just minutes ago. "I'm sorry." "I never meant to hurt you." A bitter laugh escaped me. Never meant to hurt me? While carrying on an affair long enough to conceive a child? While making anniversary dinner reservations with his wife and promises to leave her to his pregnant girlfriend on the same night? I switched off my phone and headed to the bathroom, where I scrubbed off my carefully applied makeup with the hotel's complimentary facial wipes. The woman who stared back at me from the mirror looked like a stranger. Eyes hollow with shock, skin blotchy from crying, hair still perfectly styled for a celebration that had turned into a nightmare. I unclasped the bracelet Michael had given me just hours earlier, 7 stars, 7 years, 7 wasted years, and placed it on the bathroom counter. Then I stepped into the shower, turned the water as hot as I could stand it, and finally, let myself break down completely. I don't know how long I stood there, sobs racking my body as the water pounded against my skin. Eventually, the tears subsided, leaving behind an emptiness that was somehow worse than the pain. I dried off mechanically, wrapped myself in the hotel bathrobe, and crawled into bed. Sleep seemed impossible, yet exhaustion pulled me under into fitful dreams where I kept hearing Rachel's voice. "Tell her about the baby. Tell her about the baby." I woke at dawn, disoriented until the events of the previous night came rushing back. For one merciful moment after opening my eyes, I'd forgotten, and then reality crashed over me again like a wave, stealing my breath. I reached for my phone, then hesitated. What good would it do to read more of Michael's desperate texts, to listen to voicemails full of excuses and apologies? Instead, I called the one person I knew would understand without judgment. "Natalie? It's me. I need help." To her credit, Natalie asked no questions over the phone. She simply said, "Text me your location. I'll be there in 30 minutes," and hung up. True to her word, she arrived at my hotel room door exactly half an hour later, armed with a change of clothes, strong coffee, and the fierce loyalty that had made her my best friend since college. "Oh, Liv," she said when she saw me and opened her arms. I fell into her embrace, fresh tears spilling despite my conviction that I had none left. Natalie held me, stroking my hair like I was a child, murmuring comforting nonsense until I could breathe normally again. "He's been cheating," I finally managed to say. "She's pregnant." Natalie's body stiffened, but her voice remained calm. "Tell me everything." And so I did, from the phone call at dinner to my escape to the hotel. Natalie listened without interruption, her expression growing harder with each detail. "I want to say I'm surprised," she said when I finished, "but I'm not. There was always something about Michael that didn't quite add up." "Why didn't you say something?" I asked, not accusingly, but desperately seeking to understand how I'd missed what she had apparently seen all along. Natalie sighed. "I tried, in the beginning, remember? But you were so happy, so certain. And after a while I thought maybe I was wrong. He seemed devoted to you, attentive, present." She squeezed my hand. "The best liars are the ones who believe their own lies." At least a little bit. We sat in silence for a moment, sipping the coffee she'd brought. "What do you need right now?" Natalie finally asked. What did I need? The question seemed both impossibly simple and hopelessly complex. I needed my life back. I needed the past 7 years not to be a lie. I needed to have never met Michael Rivera. "I need to not go home," I said instead. "Not yet." Natalie nodded. "You'll stay with me, as long as you need." "But what about Drew?" I asked, thinking of her husband of 3 years. "Drew adores you, and he has that business trip to Chicago this week anyway. The timing's actually perfect, and after that, we'll figure it out." She reached for her phone. "I'll call the gallery. Let them know you're taking some personal days." "No," I said, suddenly decisive. "I need to work. I need normal things. If I stop, if I just sit with this—" I trailed off, unable to articulate the fear that if I gave myself over to the grief completely, I might never find my way back. Natalie studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Okay, but we're stopping at my place first, so you can shower properly and eat something. And we're calling Whitney." Whitney? Bennett, my younger sister, fiercely protective and refreshingly straightforward. She had never particularly warmed to Michael, maintaining a polite distance that I'd attributed to the 5-year age gap between them and their very different personalities. Now I wondered if she, like Natalie, had seen something in him that I had missed. "She'll want to kill him," I said, a ghost of a smile touching my lips for the first time since the phone call. "Probably," Natalie agreed. "But she'll respect whatever you want to do. We both will." As Natalie drove us to her house, I stared out the window at the city waking up around us. People hurrying to work, jogging with their dogs, stopping for coffee. Normal lives continuing as if the world hadn't just tilted on its axis. My world, at least. My phone, which I'd reluctantly turned back on, buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Rachel. We need to talk." I stared at the message, a fresh wave of nausea washing over me. Rachel. No longer just a voice, a name on a screen, but a person real enough to have my phone number. Real enough to be carrying my husband's child. "What is it?" Natalie asked, glancing at me with concern. "Her," I said, showing her the text. "Rachel." Natalie's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "You don't owe her a response." I know, but even as I said it, a part of me wondered if I did need to talk to her. This woman who had intruded into my marriage, who might have answers to questions I wasn't even sure I wanted to ask. How long had it been going on? Did she know Michael? Was married when they met? Did she love him? Did he love her? But those questions would have to wait. Right now, I needed distance. Perspective. A moment to breathe without the crushing weight of betrayal pressing down on my chest. At Natalie's house, I took a long shower in her guest bathroom, letting the hot water wash away the physical remnants of the previous night. She had laid out clothes for me, comfortable leggings, a soft sweater, clean underwear and socks. Normal things, practical things, the kind of things a person needs when their life has just been upended. As I dressed, I caught sight of myself in the bathroom mirror again. The woman who looked back at me was still a stranger, her eyes shadowed with shock and grief. But there was something else there too, a steeliness that hadn't been present in that hotel bathroom. The first tiny seed of anger, pushing through the soil of pain. Good, I thought. I would need that anger in the days to come. It would be my shield against Michael's inevitable explanations and apologies. It would keep me upright when all I wanted was to collapse. When I emerged from the bathroom, Natalie was in the kitchen making toast and scrambled eggs. "Whitney's on her way," she said without looking up from the stove. "She's bringing the good coffee and her iPad loaded with legal resources. You know how she gets." Despite everything, I felt a surge of gratitude for these women in my life. Steady Natalie with her quiet strength, Fierce Whitney with her take-no-prisoners approach to problems. Whatever happened next, I wouldn't face it alone. My phone buzzed. Again. Michael this time. Please come home. We need to talk about this face-to-face. I stared at the message, feeling strangely detached from the pain those words should have caused. Instead, I felt something new stirring within me. Not forgiveness or understanding, certainly, but a kind of clarity that had been absent in the chaotic aftermath of the revelation. I have to go back eventually, I said, setting the phone down, without responding. Not to stay, but to figure out what comes next. Natalie placed a plate of eggs in front of me. Eat first, then we'll make a plan. One step at a time, Liv. That's the only way through this. One step at a time. It wasn't much of a plan, but as I forced myself to take a bite of toast, it was the only one I had. Step 1, survive today. Step 2 would have to wait until tomorrow. Outside, the sun was fully up now, casting long morning shadows across Natalie's kitchen floor. A new day. The first day of whatever my life would be now, after Michael, after the lie, after everything. Whitney arrived at Natalie's house like a hurricane in human form, her dark hair wild from the wind, and her eyes blazing with protective fury. She dropped her bags in the entryway and enveloped me in a fierce hug before I could even say hello. I will end him, she whispered fiercely into my ear. Just say the word. Despite everything, I found myself smiling against her shoulder. Whitney had always been the impulsive one between us, quick to anger, quick to act, protective to a fault. Where I deliberated, she decided. Where I compromised, she stood firm. Let's hold off on the homicide, I said, pulling back to look at her. At least until I figure out what I'm doing. Whitney's lips thinned, but she nodded. Fine, but the offer stands. She turned to Natalie. Did you feed her? She looks like she hasn't eaten in days. I made eggs, Natalie said, pouring coffee into 3 mugs. She had 2 bites and then pushed the plate away. They spoke about me as if I wasn't there, a tactic they'd employed since we were young whenever one of us was in crisis. Somehow it was comforting, their familiar patterns providing structure when everything else felt chaotic. Whitney sat down at the kitchen table and pulled out her iPad, all business now. Okay, I've been researching Colorado divorce laws. The good news is it's a no-fault state, so his infidelity technically doesn't matter in the division of assets. Whitney, Natalie cautioned, glancing at me, maybe let's not jump straight to divorce. What other option is there? Whitney asked, genuinely confused. He cheated. There's a baby. It's textbook grounds for divorce. She looked at me more closely. Unless. You're not considering staying, are you? The question hung in the air between us, and I realized I hadn't actually articulated, even to myself, what I intended to do next. I don't know, I admitted, wrapping my hands around the warm coffee mug. Everything happened so fast, I haven't had time to think. Whitney's expression softened. Of course. I'm sorry. I hate seeing you hurt, and I want you to know all your options. I appreciate that, I said. But right now, I need to get my things from the house. I can't keep wearing Natalie's clothes forever. I can go with you, Natalie offered immediately. We both will, Whitney added. Safety in numbers. I shook my head. I need to do this, alone. Michael will be at work, and I need to see our home, to process what's happened in my own space. My sister and friend exchanged a look I couldn't quite decipher, but they didn't argue. Instead, Whitney pulled a small canister from her bag. Then take this at least, she said, handing me the pepper spray, just in case. Under different circumstances, I might have laughed at the idea of needing protection from Michael, who, had never shown even a hint of physical aggression in our 7 years together. But nothing felt certain anymore, not even my judgment of the man I'd thought I knew better than anyone. "I'll drive you," Natalie insisted, "and I'll wait in the car, non-negotiable." An hour later, we pulled up outside my townhouse. From the outside, nothing had changed. The same neatly trimmed hedges, the same blue door with its brass knocker, the same potted plants flanking the steps. Yet everything had changed. "Call me if you need anything," Natalie said as I got out of the car. "I'll be right here." I nodded, unable to trust my voice, and walked up the familiar path to my front door. My key turned in the lock and I stepped inside the home I'd left less than 24 hours ago, though it felt like a lifetime. The house was eerily quiet. I half expected to find evidence of Michael's distress. Empty whiskey bottles, things thrown. In anger, the physical manifestation of the emotional chaos I'd been experiencing. Instead, everything was immaculate. Even the breakfast dishes had been washed and put away. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, touching surfaces, picking up photo frames. Here was our wedding day, both of us laughing as we fed each other cake. Here was a vacation in Sedona, the red rocks blazing behind our sunburned faces. Here was Christmas at my parents' house, Michael's arm around my waist as we posed before the tree. Happy moments frozen in time. Had they been real? Or had Michael been playing a part all along? In our bedroom, evidence of his turmoil finally became apparent. The bed was unmade, unusual for Michael, who was fastidious about such things. His side of the closet was in disarray, clothes pulled out and then shoved back haphazardly. On his nightstand, a half-empty glass of water sat beside his wedding ring. The sight of that small gold band hit me with unexpected force. He'd taken it off. Whatever that meant, guilt, finality, symbolic gesture, it felt like another betrayal, another tie severed. I sat on the edge of the bed, our bed, and allowed myself one moment of weakness. I buried my face in his pillow, inhaling the familiar scent of his shampoo, and let the tears come again. Not the violent sobs of the previous night, but a quieter grief for what was lost, what had perhaps never been. Then I stood, wiped my face, and got to work. I pulled a suitcase from the closet and began methodically packing what I'd need for the foreseeable future. Clothes, toiletries, important documents from the home office. I took my jewelry box, containing pieces from my mother and grandmother alongside gifts from Michael that now felt tainted. I took the framed photo of my graduation, my parents flanking me with proud smiles, one of the few pictures in the house that didn't include Michael. What I didn't take, the wedding album, stored in a white leather case on the bookshelf, the engraved champagne flutes from our first anniversary, the silk robe Michael had brought back from a business trip to Japan. These items, once precious, now seemed like artifacts from someone else's life. As I zipped the suitcase closed, I heard the front door open. Freezing, I listened to familiar footsteps in the hallway, then Michael's voice calling my name. "Olivia, your car's not here, but Natalie's outside. Are you home?" I squared my shoulders and stepped out of the bedroom to face my husband. Michael looked terrible. His usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, shirt wrinkled, hair uncombed, dark circles under bloodshot eyes. For a moment, seeing his obvious distress gave me a twisted satisfaction. Good, I thought. At least he's suffering too. "Liv?" he exhaled, relief washing over his face. "You came back." "I came for my things," I corrected, gesturing to the suitcase behind me. His face fell. "Please, can we talk? I know what you heard sounds bad, but there's more to the story." "More?" I echoed, disbelief coloring my voice. "What more could there possibly be, Michael? You have a pregnant girlfriend. On our anniversary, you were planning to leave me for her. What nuance am I missing?" "It's complicated," he said, running. A hand through his hair. "Rachel and I, It wasn't supposed to happen. It was just physical at first, a stupid mistake. But then it became something else. I tried to end it so many times, but... Stop. I held up my hand, nausea rising at his words. I don't want the sordid details of your affair. I don't care how it started or what excuses you've told yourself. The fact is, you lied to me. For how long? Months? Years? Michael looked away, unable to meet my eyes. It's been about 18 months, he admitted quietly. 18 months, while we were discussing children of our own, while we were renovating the house, while we were celebrating holidays and birthdays and planning for a future together. Why? The question escaped before I could stop it. Why? Michael? If you weren't happy, if you wanted someone else, why didn't you just tell me? Why the lies? Why the anniversary dinner if you were planning to leave? He sank onto the couch, head in his hands. I did love you, Liv. I still do. I never wanted to hurt you. But Rachel got pregnant, and she started pressuring me to make a choice. The dinner. I thought it would be easier somehow to tell you after we'd had one last good night together. One last memory before everything changed. His selfishness stunned me. One last good memory. For whom? Certainly not for me, whose every memory with him was now poisoned by the knowledge of his betrayal. So what changed? I asked, my voice hardening. Why didn't you tell me at dinner as planned? Was it too difficult to watch my face when you shattered my world? Michael had the grace to look ashamed. I couldn't do it. Sitting across from you, seeing you so happy, so beautiful. I couldn't find the words. I was going to suggest we go home first, where we could talk privately, but then Rachel called and the decision was made for you, I finished. How convenient. I moved toward the door, dragging my suitcase behind me. Michael stood, reaching for me, but I stepped back. Don't, I warned. Don't touch me. What happens now? He asked, his voice small. It was a good question. What did happen now? How did one dismantle 7 years of marriage, of shared history and belongings, of intertwined lives? I don't know, I admitted. I need time. Space to think without you trying to explain or justify or apologize. I'll be staying with Natalie. For now. I'll have my lawyer contact you about the house and the rest of our assets. Your lawyer? He sounded alarmed. Liv, are we really at that point already? I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt a strange calm descend. Yes, Michael. We're at that point. You made sure of it when you started a family with another woman while still married to me. His face crumpled. I never meant for any of this to happen. But it did happen, I said, and now we deal with the consequences. All of us. I paused at the door. Does she know you're still wearing your wedding ring, or did you just take it off for my benefit? Without waiting for his answer, I walked out, closing the door firmly behind me. Natalie was out of her car, in an instant, hurrying to take my suitcase and help me into the passenger seat. You okay? She asked as we pulled away from the curb. I looked back at the house where I'd been so happy, where I'd believed I was building a future with a man who loved me as completely as I loved him. Michael stood in the doorway, watching us leave. No, I said honestly, but I will be. As we drove away, I felt something shift inside me. Grief making room for a new emotion, one I desperately needed. Resolve. Whatever came next. However painful the process of unraveling my marriage would be, I would face it. I would survive it. I had to. The gallery had always been my sanctuary, a place where beauty and order prevailed, where I could lose myself in the appreciation of other people's visions. 3 days after my confrontation with Michael, I returned to work, craving the normalcy and distraction it would provide. My colleagues had been told I was dealing with a family emergency, a vague explanation that invited no questions. Catherine, The gallery owner and my mentor for the past 5 years simply welcomed me back with a gentle squeeze of my shoulder and a whispered, "Whatever you need, just ask." What I needed, it turned out, was work. Absorbing, demanding work that left no room for thoughts of Michael, Rachel, or the shambles of my personal life. I threw myself into preparations for our upcoming exhibition featuring emerging Latin American artists, making phone calls, reviewing layouts, writing press releases. If I worked until exhaustion each day, I could fall asleep at Natalie's without lying awake, analyzing every moment of my marriage for signs I should have seen. By Friday, a tentative new routine had established itself. Mornings spent at the gallery, afternoons meeting with artists or potential buyers, evenings at Natalie's where she and Whitney took turns keeping me company, making sure I ate, gently steering conversations away from Michael whenever possible. I hadn't heard from him since our confrontation at the house, though my lawyer, a steely-eyed woman named Madeline whom Whitney had recommended, informed me he'd retained counsel of his own. The legal machinery of divorce was grinding into motion, impersonal and inexorable. I was in the gallery's back office, reviewing a shipment manifest, when Catherine appeared in the doorway. "Olivia, there's someone here to see you," she said, her expression carefully neutral. "She doesn't have an appointment, but she's quite insistent." A prickle of unease ran down my spine. "Did she give a name?" Catherine hesitated. "Rachel Porter. She says it's personal." The manifest slipped from my suddenly numb fingers. "Rachel, here, in my workspace, my safe haven." "Should I tell her you're unavailable?" Catherine asked, reading my expression. I took a deep breath, weighing my options. I could avoid this confrontation, continue to hide away at Natalie's, pretend this woman didn't exist. Or I could face her, see with my own eyes the person for whom Michael had been willing to destroy our marriage. "No," I decided, smoothing my skirt as I stood. "I'll see her." Catherine looked uncertain. "I can stay if you want, or call security to stand by." I almost smiled at that. What did she think would happen? A physical altercation between the wife and mistress, like something from a soap opera. "That won't be necessary," I assured her. "We'll use the small conference room." As I walked through the gallery toward the reception area, I attempted to compose myself, to present an image of dignity and control. Whatever this Rachel wanted, to gloat, to explain, to demand, I would not give her the satisfaction of seeing me broken. She was standing by the front desk, examining a small bronze sculpture with apparent interest. I paused for a moment, studying her unobserved. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 30 to my 37, with honey blonde hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. She wore a simple navy dress that did little to disguise her pregnant belly, not prominently showing yet, but unmistakable to anyone looking. "Miss Porter," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'm Olivia Rivera." She turned, and I was struck by how ordinary she looked. Not the vixen I'd imagined in my darker moments, but a woman with clear blue eyes and a hesitant expression. She extended her hand automatically, then seemed to think better of it and withdrew it. "Thank you for seeing me, Mrs. Rivera," she said, her voice matching the one I'd heard through Michael's phone, the voice that had shattered my world. "I know this must be difficult." "That's certainly one word for it," I replied, gesturing toward the conference room. "Shall we?" The small room held only a round table and 4 chairs, with a large window overlooking the busy street below. I took a seat with my back to the window, leaving Rachel to choose whether to sit across from me or at a less confrontational angle. She chose directly opposite, meeting my gaze with a forthrightness I hadn't expected. "I want to apologize," she began, hands folded on the table. "Not for loving Michael. I can't apologize for that, but for how you found out. That call. It wasn't meant to happen that way." "How was it meant to happen?" I asked, genuine curiosity cutting through my resentment. Michael scheduling the end of our marriage like a business meeting? A Dear John letter waiting for me when I got home from work? Rachel winced. He said he was going to tell you at dinner. That's why I called. I was checking to make sure he'd actually gone through with it. Michael has a habit of avoiding difficult conversations. I laughed, a short, bitter sound. Yes, I've noticed that about the man I've been married to for 7 years. 6, she corrected quietly. Excuse me? You've been married to Michael for 6 years, not 7. Your anniversary isn't until next month. The room seemed to tilt around me as I processed her words. Our anniversary was Tuesday, November 12th. We were married on November 12th, 2016. Rachel's face paled. That's not. He told me your anniversary was in December. That's why I thought. She trailed off, realization dawning in her eyes. He lied to me too. We sat in stunned silence, 2 women confronting the reality that the man connecting us was perhaps not who either of us believed him to be. Why are you here, Rachel? I finally asked. What do you want from me? She took a deep breath, composing herself. I wanted to meet you, to see the woman Michael has talked about for the past 1.5 years. And I wanted to tell you my side of the story, if you're willing to hear it. Part of me wanted to refuse, to stand and walk away, to maintain the comforting narrative of villains and victims I'd constructed. But another part, the part that had always sought truth, even painful truth, needed to understand. I'm listening, I said. Rachel nodded, gathering her thoughts. I met Michael at a benefit for the Children's Hospital. I'm a pediatric nurse there, and he was representing his firm, which had donated design services for the new wing. We talked about architecture, about my work with the kids. It was professional, friendly. He wore his wedding ring. I knew he was married. She paused, twisting her hands together. He asked for my number, said his firm was looking for healthcare consultants for future projects. It seemed legitimate. We met for coffee a few times, always during the day, always in public places. Then one evening, he called, sounding upset. He said he'd had a fight with his wife, with you, and needed someone to talk to. I could imagine the scene clearly. Michael, charming and vulnerable, sharing just enough to seem open without revealing too much. I'd seen him use the same technique with clients, creating a false sense of intimacy that made people eager to please him. Let me guess, I said. He told you I didn't understand him, that our marriage was essentially over, but we were staying together for, what? Financial reasons? Appearances? Rachel looked away. He said you were emotionally distant, that you were more concerned with your career than your marriage, that you'd decided you didn't want children after all, even though having a family was everything to him. Each word was a fresh cut. Michael. And I had discussed children extensively, deciding together to focus on our careers first. If anything, in recent years, I'd been the one bringing up the topic of starting a family, while he'd suggested we wait just a little longer. And you believed him, I said. Not a question, but a statement. I did, she admitted. Why wouldn't He was sincere, attentive, seemingly transparent about his situation. By the time I realized there were inconsistencies in his story, I was already in love with him. She rested a protective hand on her belly. Already pregnant. When did you find out about the baby? 3 months ago. It wasn't planned. I was on birth control. But when I told Michael, he seemed happy. Said it was a sign we were meant to be together. That he'd tell you after your anniversary trip. What anniversary trip? I asked, confused. Rachel's eyes widened. To Napa Valley. He said he'd booked it months ago, that canceling would raise suspicions. Another lie. There had been no planned trip, no getaway to wine country. Just a dinner reservation at an expensive restaurant where he'd apparently planned to end our marriage before changing his mind. Did you know, I asked, keeping my voice level, that while he was telling you he was going to leave me, he gave me this? I extended my wrist, showing her the gold bracelet I'd put back on that morning without knowing why. 7 stars for 7 years of marriage. Except according to you, we've only been married for 6 years. So either he can't count, or he's been lying to both of us. Rachel stared at the bracelet, her composure finally cracking. I don't understand, he said. He promised. I think, I said gently, surprising myself with the lack of animosity I felt toward this woman, that Michael has been telling each of us what we wanted to hear, what served his purposes at any given moment. She nodded slowly, tears gathering in her eyes. I should have known. There were signs. Phone calls he'd take in another room, weekends he was supposedly working but unreachable, inconsistencies, in stories about his past. I just didn't want to see them. Neither did I admitted. 7 years, or 6, apparently, and I never suspected he was capable of this level of deception. We sat in silence for a moment, 2 women united in their disillusionment. Then Rachel straightened, wiping away a tear that had escaped. I didn't come here to cry or to cause you more pain, she said. I came because I thought you deserved to know the truth, and because... She hesitated, then continued with renewed determination. Because I'm keeping this baby, with or without Michael in the picture, and I thought you should hear that from me, not through lawyers or mutual acquaintances. I studied her face, the stubborn set of her chin, the protective way she cradled her belly, and felt an unexpected surge of respect. Whatever her mistakes in getting involved with a married man, she was facing the consequences with courage. Thank you for telling me, I said. And for what it's worth, I'm sorry too. Not for loving Michael, as you said. I can't apologize for that. But for the pain you're experiencing now. No one deserves to be lied to like this. Rachel nodded, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. You're not at all what he described, you know. He made you sound cold, calculating, career-obsessed. But you're actually... kind. And you're not the home-wrecking vixen I imagined, I replied. I guess Michael has a talent for fiction as well as architecture. She stood, gathering her purse. I should go. Thank you for seeing me. I rose as well, suddenly uncertain of the protocol for ending such an unprecedented conversation. Rachel, I said as she turned to leave. The baby. Do you know yet if it's a boy or a girl? She placed her hand on her belly again, a gesture I suspected was unconscious. A girl, she said softly. Due in May. A daughter, Michael's daughter, the child that might have been mine in another life. She'll be beautiful, I said, surprised to find I meant it. Rachel paused at the door. Olivia, what will you do now? About Michael, I mean. I considered the question, one I'd been asking myself for days. I'm not sure, but I know what I won't do. I won't let him define my future the way he's tried to rewrite our past. She nodded, understanding in her eyes. Good luck, I think. I think we both deserve better than what he's given us. As the door closed behind her, I sank back into my chair, overwhelmed by the surreal nature of the encounter. I had just had a civil, almost friendly conversation with my husband's pregnant girlfriend. And somehow, impossibly, I felt lighter. For it. My phone buzzed with a text from Whitney. Emergency ice cream and wine session tonight? Natalie's bringing the good stuff. I smiled, grateful once again for the constants in my life. Definitely. And I have quite a story to tell. Outside, the window, the late autumn sun cast long shadows across the street. People hurried along the sidewalk, wrapped in scarves and jackets, each carrying their own invisible burdens, their own complicated truths. Among them, I spotted Rachel, her blonde ponytail catching the light as she waited to cross at the intersection. For a moment, I felt an odd connection to this stranger who was not really a stranger. This woman whose life had become entangled with mine through the actions of a man neither of us truly knew. Then the light changed. She crossed the street and was gone, continuing on her own path as I would continue on mine. She said what? Whitney nearly choked on her wine, eyes wide with disbelief. It was later that evening, and I was recounting my conversation with Rachel to Whitney and Natalie in the comfort of Natalie's living room. Empty ice cream containers littered the coffee table, and we were halfway through our second bottle of Cabernet. That Michael told her we'd only been married for 6 years, not 7, I repeated, and that we were supposedly going on an anniversary trip to Napa Valley, a trip that never existed. Natalie leaned forward, brow furrowed. Why would he lie? About something so easily disproven. I mean, your wedding date is on your marriage license, in your photo albums, on your social media memories. That's the thing, I said, swirling the wine in my glass. I don't think Michael expected us to ever compare notes. He created separate narratives for each of us, never imagining they'd collide. Classic compartmentalization, Whitney said. Her psychology degree often surfaced in moments like these. People who lead double lives rely on keeping their worlds completely separate. I thought about the other revelations from my conversation with Rachel, how Michael had portrayed me, as cold and career-obsessed, how he'd claimed I didn't want children. The painful irony of that particular lie wasn't lost on me. You know what the strangest part is? I set my glass down. I actually liked her. Rachel, I mean. Under different circumstances, we might have been friends. Whitney made a skeptical noise. She slept with your husband, Liv. I know. But she didn't know the truth either. Not all of it, anyway. She's as much a victim of Michael's lies as I am. I paused, considering. Maybe more so, given her condition. Speaking of which, Natalie said gently, how do you feel about the baby? About Michael becoming a father? It was the question I'd been avoiding since learning of the pregnancy, the complicated tangle of emotions too painful to examine closely. Jealousy, loss, a strange sense of connection to a child who might have been mine, all of it swirled together in a knot I wasn't ready to unravel. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me is angry that she gets this piece of him that I wanted. Part of me is relieved it's her dealing with midnight feedings and co-parenting with someone who's proven himself unreliable. Mostly, I just feel disconnected from it, like it's happening in a parallel universe that split off from mine. Whitney reached for my hand, squeezing it gently. That's understandable. All of those feelings are valid. What about Michael? Natalie asked. Has he tried to contact you again? I shook my head. Not since I left the house. My lawyer says his attorney reached out about possibly reconciling, but I shut that down immediately. Good, Whitney said firmly. Because after everything you've told us, it sounds like Michael is not just a cheater, but a pathological liar. The words hung in the air, harsh but impossible to dispute. The evidence was mounting that Michael's deception went beyond a simple affair, beyond even the pregnancy. The different anniversaries, the fictional trip, the contradictory stories he'd told Rachel and me, all pointed to a pattern of calculated dishonesty that was difficult to comprehend. I think I need to find out what else he lied about, I said slowly, the decision crystallizing as I spoke. Not just for closure, but for, I don't know, reality testing? I've spent 7 years building a life with someone who might not be, who I thought he was. I need to know what was real and what wasn't. Natalie looked concerned. Are you sure that's a good idea? Digging into his lies might just cause more pain. Maybe, I acknowledged. But right now, I'm questioning every memory, every conversation. Did he actually love me at all, or was I just convenient? Was our entire marriage a performance? Whitney set down her wine glass decisively. If you're doing this, we're helping. Where do we start? I considered the question. His work, I think. Some of the inconsistencies Rachel mentioned involved his schedule, weekends he claimed to be working. Can you access his email? Natalie asked. No, but... I paused, remembering something. His firm uses a shared cloud drive for project files. I have the login information because I helped him recover his password once. If he's been lying about work commitments... Whitney was already reaching for her laptop. Let's take a look. 3 hours and another bottle of wine later, we had uncovered the first concrete evidence of Michael's broader deception. The project in Chicago that had allegedly required 5 separate weekend trips over the past year. It existed, but Michael's name didn't appear on any of the team documents after the initial pitch. The emergency client meeting in Aspen last Valentine's Day, no record of any such client or meeting. Check this out, Natalie said, pointing to a folder dated 2 months ago. Wasn't this when he said he was at that architectural conference in San Diego? I nodded, clicking on the folder. Inside was a presentation Michael had supposedly delivered at the conference, slides detailing sustainable building practices for coastal properties. It was well-researched, beautifully designed, exactly the kind of work that had earned Michael his reputation in the field. So he did go to the conference, Whitney said, looking disappointed that we hadn't uncovered another lie. Let me check something, I murmured, opening a new browser tab and searching for the conference details. A few clicks later, I found the event schedule. There it is, I pointed to the screen. Day 2, 2:30 p.m. session. Sustainable design for coastal environments. But the presenter isn't Michael. It's Thomas Hargrove, his colleague. He took credit for someone else's presentation? Natalie looked shocked. No, I said slowly, piecing it together. He created the presentation for Thomas to deliver. Michael was never scheduled to attend the conference at all. A chill ran through me as the implications became clear. For years, I'd been proud of Michael's professional accomplishments. His promotions, his industry recognition, the respect he commanded from colleagues and clients. But what if those accomplishments weren't entirely his? What if he'd been taking credit for others' work? Or conversely, doing work he never received recognition for? We need to go bigger, Whitney said, her investigative instincts fully engaged. Now. Financial records, phone bills, credit card statements. I have access to our joint accounts, I said. But Michael has separate credit cards too. And a separate phone? Natalie asked. Not that I know of, but... I trailed off, remembering something. Last year, I found a receipt for a phone, repair in his jacket pocket. When I asked about it, he said he'd gotten a colleague's phone fixed as a favor. I never thought to question it. Whitney raised an eyebrow. A burner phone? Maybe, I conceded, the idea both disturbing and increasingly plausible. How would we even find out? I might know someone who could help, Natalie said hesitantly. My cousin works in digital forensics. She might be able to check for additional phone lines registered under his name or connected to your family plan. I hesitated, uncomfortable with the idea of involving more people in what was already a humiliating situation. But the need to understand the extent of Michael's deception outweighed my pride. Okay, I agreed. But let's be discreet. As Natalie stepped out to call her cousin, Whitney turned to me with a serious expression. Liv, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest. Are you doing this to try to save your marriage? Because if Michael has been living a double life all this time... No, I interrupted, surprising myself with the firmness of my response. This isn't about reconciliation. It's about understanding what happened so I can move forward without doubting my own judgment. I spent 7 years with Michael, trusting him completely. If I missed signs of such fundamental dishonesty, how can I ever trust myself or anyone else again? Whitney nodded, seeming satisfied with my answer. That's a healthy perspective. Just be prepared for the possibility that what we find might be worse than you're imagining. Natalie returned, looking pleased. Eliza says she can help. She needs access to your mobile account and any financial records you have. She also suggested we try to access his password manager if he uses one. He does, I confirmed. LastPass. And I know the master password. It's a combination of his mother's maiden name and the year their family home was built. Or at least that's what he'd told me. Now I wondered if even that small detail was a fabrication. For the next several days, we conducted what Whitney jokingly called Operation Truth Seeker, methodically investigating different aspects of Michael's life. Natalie's cousin confirmed our suspicion about a second phone, a prepaid line that had been active for nearly 2 years, with calls and texts to numbers across the country, including Rachel's. Financial records revealed even more troubling patterns. Small but regular withdrawals from our joint savings account transferred to a personal account I'd never known existed. Charges at jewelry stores and high-end restaurants in cities where Michael had allegedly been for work, but on dates that didn't align with his supposed business trips. Most disturbing was what we found when I finally worked up the courage to visit our storage unit, a space in the basement of our building where we kept holiday decorations, off-season clothes, and mementos. Hidden behind boxes of Christmas ornaments was a small filing cabinet I'd never seen before, locked with a simple key that matched one on Michael's keyring that I'd always assumed was for his office. Inside the cabinet were documents that sent my world tilting once again. A lease agreement for an apartment in Boulder, 30 minutes from our Denver home. Utility bills addressed to Michael Rivera at that address. And most shocking of all, a life insurance policy, purchased 3 years into our marriage, naming as beneficiary not me, but a woman named Diana Reyes. "Who the hell is Diana Reyes?" Whitney asked, peering over my shoulder at the document. I shook my head, numb with shock. I have no idea. But even as I said it, a memory surfaced, a casual mention years ago of a college girlfriend named Diana, whom Michael had described as the one who got away before I found the one I was meant to be with. I'd been touched by the sentiment, at the time, flattered to be considered his true love. "We need to find her," I said, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. Diana Reyes. If Michael kept an insurance policy with her as beneficiary all these years. "You think she might be more than just the girlfriend who got away," Natalie finished, understanding dawning in her eyes. I nodded, unable to articulate. The fear taking shape in my mind, that Rachel might not be Michael's only other relationship. That the deception might be more extensive, more systematic than any of us had imagined. "This is turning into something out of a Lifetime movie," Whitney muttered, but her expression was concerned rather than judgmental. As we locked the storage unit and headed back to Natalie's car, I felt a strange sense of clarity cutting through the shock and confusion. The pain was still there, raw and pulsing, but alongside it was a growing determination. Whatever we discovered about Diana Reyes, whatever additional lies were uncovered, I would face them head-on. The man I had married, the Michael I thought I knew, had never really existed. He was a carefully constructed facade, designed to show each person in his life exactly what they wanted to see. The sooner I accepted that truth, the sooner I could begin to rebuild from the rubble of my shattered illusions. "Are you okay?" Natalie asked as we drove away, concern evident in her voice. I looked out at the city passing by, the familiar streets and buildings of a life that no longer felt like mine. "No," I said honestly, but for the first time since that phone call at dinner, I think I might be someday. Finding Diana Reyes proved surprisingly straightforward. Natalie's cousin Eliza, with her digital forensics expertise, traced the address on the insurance policy to a modest townhouse in a North Boulder neighborhood known for its young professionals and academic types. A quick social media search revealed a woman in her mid-30s, with warm brown eyes and a wide smile, who worked as a professor of environmental engineering at the University of Colorado. What wasn't straightforward was deciding what to do with this information. "We could just drive by," Whitney suggested as we sat around Natalie's kitchen table the following Sunday, staring at a printed photo of Diana's townhouse. "Do some reconnaissance without actually confronting her." "That feels invasive," Natalie countered, "and honestly, a little stalkerish." I traced the outline of the insurance policy with my finger, still struggling to comprehend how Michael had maintained this connection to a former girlfriend throughout our marriage, going so far as to name her the beneficiary of a life insurance policy I hadn't even known existed. "I need to talk to her," I said finally. "Face to face, just like with Rachel. If Michael has been living some kind of triple life, I need to understand how, why. I need to see the full picture." Whitney looked skeptical. "And if she slams the door in your face? Or worse, if she's actually been in contact with Michael and warns him that you're on to whatever this is?" It was a valid concern. Though Michael hadn't reached out to me directly since our confrontation at the house, his lawyer had been in regular contact with Madeline, my attorney. According to Madeline, he was pushing for a quick, quiet divorce settlement, offering generous terms if I agreed to minimal investigation into our financial history. "That offer alone tells me he's hiding something significant," Madeline had said during our last meeting. "No one volunteers to give away assets unless they're protecting something bigger." Now, faced with the prospect of confronting yet another woman in Michael's web of deception, I found myself strangely calm. The initial shock and pain of betrayal had not diminished, exactly, but had transformed into something more focused. A determination to uncover the full truth, however painful it might be. "I'll call her," I decided. "Set up a meeting somewhere public. That way she has the option to decline, and I don't show up unannounced at her home." "And what exactly will you say?" Natalie asked. "Hi, I'm Olivia Rivera, and I think my husband might have a secret relationship with you." I managed a small smile. "Something like that, minus the accusatory tone. I'll simply tell her I'm Michael's wife, and I've discovered some concerning documents that list her as a beneficiary. I'd like to understand why." Whitney still looked dubious, but she nodded. "Direct but not confrontational. I like it. But one of us is coming with you." "Agreed," said Natalie firmly. "Safety in numbers." The next morning, after a nearly sleepless night rehearsing various scenarios in my head, I called the number listed for Diana Reyes on the university's faculty directory. The phone rang 4 times before a pleasant, slightly accented voice answered. "Dr. Reyes speaking." I took a deep breath. "Dr. Reyes, my name is Olivia Rivera. You don't know me, but I believe we have a mutual connection. Michael Rivera. He's my husband." A pause. So long I thought the call might have dropped. Then, in a voice noticeably cooler, "I see. How did you get this number, Mrs. Rivera?" "It's publicly listed on the university website," I explained, then pushed forward before I lost my nerve. "I've recently discovered some concerning information about Michael, including a life insurance policy that names you as the beneficiary. I was hoping we might be able to meet in person to discuss this." Another long pause. I could almost feel her weighing her options, deciding how much to reveal. "Are you in Boulder?" she finally asked. "Denver, but I can drive up today if you're available." "There's a coffee shop on Pearl Street called Verdant. I can meet you there at 3. Relief flooded through me. "Thank you. I'll be there. I'll be wearing a red blazer." "I know what you look like, Mrs. Rivera," Diana said quietly. "Michael keeps your wedding photo on his desk." Before I could process that revelation, she had ended the call, leaving me staring at my phone in confusion. Michael kept our wedding photo on his desk? What desk? In what office? According to all the evidence we'd gathered, he worked exclusively from the architectural firm's Denver headquarters, with occasional visits to project sites. I called Whitney immediately. She agreed to meet, Today at 3, at a coffee shop, in Boulder. And Whitney. She said Michael keeps our wedding photo on his desk, as if he has an office I don't know about. This keeps getting weirder, Whitney replied. I'm coming with you. I'll pick you up at 1:30. The drive to Boulder was tense, both of us speculating about what Diana might reveal. Was she another mistress? A long-term girlfriend Michael had maintained contact with despite our marriage? Or was there some innocent explanation for her being named on his life insurance policy? A document he had carefully hidden from me. Varden turned out to be a stylish but cozy cafe with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Pearl Street's pedestrian mall. I spotted Diana immediately, sitting at a corner table with 2 ceramic mugs already in front of her. She looked exactly like her social media photos. Petite with shoulder-length dark hair, casually elegant in a simple blue dress and cardigan. She stood as Whitney and I approached, extending her hand with formal politeness. Mrs. Rivera. I took the liberty of ordering for us. They make an excellent lavender latte here. I hope that's acceptable. Please call me Olivia, I said, shaking her hand. And this is my sister Whitney. Diana nodded at Whitney but kept her focus on me, her expression carefully neutral as we sat down. Thank you for agreeing to meet, I began, taking a sip of the latte, which was indeed excellent. I imagine this is uncomfortable for you. That depends, Diana replied, studying me with intelligent eyes, on what exactly you believe my relationship with Michael to be. I decided on directness. Honestly, I don't know. A week ago, I discovered my husband has been having an affair and is expecting a child with another woman. Since then, I've uncovered numerous inconsistencies in what I thought was our life together. Finding a hidden life insurance policy with your name on it was just the latest surprise. Diana's composed expression faltered slightly. Michael is having a child with someone? The genuine shock in her voice was impossible to miss. Whatever I had expected, defensiveness, guilt, even hostility, this seemed to be news to her as, well. Yes, I confirmed. Her name is Rachel Porter. She's a nurse at Denver Children's Hospital. From what I've pieced together, their relationship has been going on for about 18 months. Diana set down her mug with deliberate care. I see. Well, that certainly complicates things. Complicates what exactly? Whitney interjected, her protective instincts clearly triggered by Diana's cryptic response. Diana took a deep breath, as if coming to a decision. I think I should start from the beginning. Michael and I met 12 years ago at UC Berkeley, where I was completing my doctoral work, and he was finishing his master's in architecture. We were together for 3 years before I accepted a position here at CU Boulder. Michael followed me to Colorado, and we continued our relationship. I did the math quickly. 12 years ago would have been 4 years before I met Michael. But that meant. You were still together when he met me, I said, the realization hitting like a physical blow. Diana nodded, her expression softening with what looked like genuine sympathy. Yes. Though I didn't know about you at the time. Michael told me he needed to spend more time in Denver for a major project his firm was undertaking. Our time together became more limited, but I attributed that to our careers, mine in academia, his in a demanding professional firm. When did you find out about me? I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. 3 years into your marriage, Diana replied. I saw a society page mention of the two of you at a charity event. There was a photo, and the caption identified you as Michael's wife. Whitney leaned forward, incredulous. You saw that your boyfriend was married to someone else and you stayed with him? Diana met her gaze unflinchingly. I confronted him. Of course. He told me that his marriage to Olivia was essentially a business arrangement, that her family had connections his firm needed, that you had agreed to an open marriage but preferred not to know the details. He seemed so sincere, so apologetic for not telling me sooner. The absurdity of Michael's explanation might have made me laugh under different circumstances. My family had no special connections. My father was a high school English teacher, my mother a nurse practitioner. We were solidly middle class, with no influential networks that could possibly benefit Michael's career. None of that is true, I said. My family has no special influence, and we certainly never agreed to an open marriage. Diana's lips thinned. I realized that eventually, but by then we had established a pattern. Michael spent weekends and some weeknights at my place, in Boulder. He contributed to the mortgage. He kept clothes and personal items here. He had a small home office where he worked remotely when he wasn't in Denver. The desk with our wedding photo, I murmured. She nodded. I asked him about that once. He said it was to maintain appearances in case any colleagues ever visited. I thought it was strange, but... She shrugged, looking embarrassed. When you love someone, you can rationalize almost anything. I understood that all too well. Hadn't I overlooked my own suspicions for years? Hadn't I accepted Michael's increasingly thin explanations for his absences, his secretive phone habits, the inconsistencies in his stories? So, for the past 7 years, Whitney clarified, Michael has essentially been living a double life between Denver and Boulder, with you thinking his marriage was just for show, and Olivia thinking he was faithfully committed to her? That appears to be the case, Diana confirmed. And now it seems there was a third woman as well. She shook her head, a flash of anger finally breaking through her composed demeanor. How did he manage it? The logistics alone. He's very organized, I said, a hysterical edge creeping into my laughter. Always kept meticulous calendars. I thought it was just his professional thoroughness. The life insurance policy, Whitney prompted, bringing us back to the original reason for our meeting. Diana's expression grew more serious. That was from earlier in our relationship, before I knew about you. We had talked about marriage, about building a future together. The policy was Michael's idea. A gesture of commitment, he said. After I discovered his marriage to you, he insisted on keeping it active. Said it was the least he could do, given the circumstances. When was the last time you saw him? I asked. 2 weeks ago. He said he had to cancel our weekend plans because of an emergency client meeting in Aspen. Diana's eyes narrowed as she processed her own words. I'm guessing there was no meeting. No, I confirmed. That was the weekend he took Rachel to a bed and breakfast in Vail. At least according to the credit card statements we found. The three of us sat in silence for a moment, each processing the enormity of Michael's deception. It seemed impossible that one person could maintain such elaborate fiction for so long, juggling relationships, residences, conflicting stories, and schedules without eventually making a mistake that would bring everything crashing down. Yet he had managed it for years, and might have continued indefinitely if Rachel hadn't made that fateful call during our anniversary dinner. What now? Diana finally asked, her voice subdued. Have you spoken with Michael about any of this? I shook my head. Not since I left our house the day after the phone call. My lawyer is handling all communication. Michael's been pushing for a quick divorce settlement. Of course he has, Diana said with a bitter smile. He's trying to contain the damage before his entire house of cards collapses. She was right, I realized. Michael wasn't merely a cheater caught in an unfortunate situation. He was a calculated manipulator watching his carefully constructed world unravel and doing everything possible to limit the fallout. I'm curious, Whitney said, studying Diana with narrowed eyes. Why are you being so forthcoming with us? You could have refused to meet or denied everything. Diana considered the question. Because I'm tired of living in shadows, of accepting partial truths and convenient fictions. Because I think Olivia deserves to know what kind of man she married. She paused, meeting my gaze directly. And because I suspect I need to reevaluate my own life choices. just as you're being forced to do. As we prepared to leave, Diana handed me a business card with her personal number written on the back. If you need anything, confirmation of dates, details for your lawyer, or just someone who understands what it's like to have loved Michael Rivera, please call me. The sincerity in her voice was unmistakable. This woman, who by all rights should have seen me as competition or an obstacle, was instead offering alliance. We had both been deceived by the same man, our lives shaped by his lies in different, but equally profound ways. Thank you, I said, taking the card. I might take you up on that. As Whitney and I walked back to her car, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across Pearl Street, I felt oddly lighter despite the new revelations. Each piece of the puzzle, painful as it was to discover, brought me closer to understanding the full scope of what had happened. And with understanding, I hoped, would eventually come the ability to move forward. You okay? Whitney asked as we pulled away from the curb. I gazed out at the Flatiron Mountains rising dramatically against the sky, their solid presence a stark contrast to the shifting sands of my marriage. I will be, I said. And for the first time since that fateful phone call, I believed it might actually be true. The revelations about Diana Reyes changed everything. What I had initially believed to be a painful but somewhat conventional story of infidelity had transformed into something far more disturbing, a deliberate long-term deception that spanned the entirety of my relationship with Michael. We need to update Madeline immediately, Whitney insisted as we drove back to Denver. This completely changes the divorce dynamics. If Michael has been maintaining two households, there could be significant financial implications. She was Right, of course. If Michael had been contributing to Diana's mortgage for years, where had that money come from? Our joint accounts? His separate funds? How many other accounts, properties, or financial entanglements might exist that I knew nothing about? Madeline's response to our findings was swift and decisive. This changes our approach entirely, she said when we met in her office the following morning. We're no longer dealing with a simple infidelity situation, but a case of systematic deception and potential financial fraud. She typed rapid notes into her computer, glasses perched on the end of her nose. I'm going to file for comprehensive financial discovery, tax returns, bank statements, investment accounts, retirement funds, everything. And I'll request a forensic accountant to trace all money flows over the past 7 years. Is that necessary? I asked, still hesitant to escalate what was already a painful process. Madeline fixed me with a stern look. Olivia, a man who can maintain 3 separate relationships for years is capable of hiding significant assets. We need to understand the full picture before agreeing to any settlement. She was right, though the prospect of a protracted legal battle filled me with dread. I had hoped, initially, for a quick and relatively amicable separation, a clean break that would allow me to begin rebuilding my life. Now it seemed that untangling myself from Michael would be as complex and painful as understanding the extent of his betrayal. What about Rachel and Diana? I asked. Should they be involved in this process? Legally, no, Madeline replied. Rachel has no claim on marital assets unless Michael has acknowledged paternity of her child, which would only affect potential child support arrangements. Diana's situation is more complicated since she's been financially entangled with Michael. But as they weren't married, her recourse would be through separate civil action. She leaned forward, expression softening slightly. That said, maintaining contact with both women might be strategically advantageous. The more information we have about Michael's activities and finances, the stronger our position. My phone buzzed with a text as we were leaving the law office. I expected it to be Natalie or Whitney, but instead saw Michael's name on the screen. For the first time in weeks, we need to talk. In person. No lawyers. This has gone far enough. A second message followed immediately. I know you met with Diana. This isn't what you think. A chill ran through me. How did he know about our meeting with Diana? Had she contacted him despite our conversation? Or was he monitoring my movements somehow? I showed Whitney the messages, and her eyes narrowed. "He's panicking," she said. "The walls are closing in, and he's trying to regain control." That assessment aligned with what I was feeling, that Michael's texts weren't an attempt at reconciliation, but at damage control. For years, he had maintained separate worlds through careful compartmentalization. Now those worlds were colliding, and he was scrambling to contain the fallout. "Should I respond?" I asked as we got into Whitney's car. "Yes," she said after a moment's consideration, "but don't agree to meet him alone. Suggest a public place and bring someone with you." I considered my options before typing a reply. "I'll meet you tomorrow at Crest Coffee downtown. 2 p.m. I'm bringing Whitney." His response came quickly. "This should be between us, Olivia. No need to involve your sister." "Whitney comes with me or we don't meet at all," I responded firmly. There was a longer pause before his final message appeared. "Fine. 2 p.m. Preparing to face Michael after everything I'd learned felt like preparing for battle. I spent that evening reviewing notes from our investigations, rereading text messages, studying financial documents Madeline had helped me obtain. I wanted to go into this confrontation armed with facts, not just emotions. Sleep eluded me that night. I kept imagining different scenarios for our meeting. Michael tearfully confessing everything, Michael angrily denying the evidence, Michael attempting to manipulate me as he had so successfully for years. By morning, I felt simultaneously exhausted and wired, my nerves stretched to breaking point. "Remember," Whitney coached as we walked into the coffee shop the following afternoon, "you hold the power now. He doesn't know exactly what you know, or what evidence you have. Let him talk. Let him reveal himself." Michael was already there when we arrived, seated at a table in the far corner. He stood as we approached, and I was struck by how unfamiliar he looked. This man I had woken up beside for 7 years. He had lost weight, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. His normally impeccable appearance was slightly disheveled, his shirt wrinkled, his hair in need of a trim. For a moment, I felt an unwelcome surge of concern, the habitual response of a wife seeing her husband in distress. I pushed it down firmly, reminding myself that any suffering he was experiencing was entirely self-inflicted. "Olivia," he said, his voice hoarse. He nodded stiffly at Whitney. "Thanks for coming." We sat, an uncomfortable triangle around the small table. I had positioned myself so my back was to the wall, facing both the exit and Michael, a subconscious, defensive posture that hadn't gone unnoticed by my sister, who gave me a subtle nod of approval. "You wanted to talk," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "So talk." Michael ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture I recognized from countless difficult conversations over the years. How many of those conversations, I wondered, had contained lies I had accepted without question? "This has gotten out of hand," he began. "Lawyers, investigations, meeting with Diana behind my back." "It's not necessary, Liv. We can work this out between us." "Work what out exactly?" I asked. "The fact that you've been living with another woman for our entire marriage? The pregnant girlfriend? The hidden financial accounts? Please, Michael, clarify which part of your deception we're supposed to work out." He flinched at my tone. "I know how this looks, but it's more complicated than you think." "Then uncomplicate it for me," I challenged. "Explain to me how you managed to convince Diana you were in a committed relationship with her while being married to me. Explain how you justified getting Rachel pregnant while maintaining 2 other relationships. I'm genuinely curious about your thought process." Michael looked down at his untouched coffee, seeming to gather his thoughts. "It wasn't planned," he finally said. "Diana and I were together first. When I met you, I intended to end things with her. But then my firm opened the Boulder satellite office, and I was assigned to head it up. It seemed convenient to maintain my relationship with Diana while I was there 3 days a week. Convenient, I echoed, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. He continued, a hint of defensiveness entering his voice. I know it sounds terrible, but I cared about both of you. Different relationships fulfilled different needs. With Diana, it was intellectual connection, professional collaboration. With you, it was partnership, stability, a shared vision for the future. And Rachel? Whitney interjected, her tone acid. What need did she fulfill? Michael shot her an irritated glance before returning his attention to me. Rachel was a mistake, a genuine lapse in judgment during a difficult period. Diana was traveling for a semester abroad program. You were focused on the gallery expansion. I was lonely. The sheer audacity of his excuses left me momentarily speechless. He spoke as if his deception had been a reasonable response to ordinary life circumstances rather than a calculated pattern of betrayal. You weren't lonely, Michael, I finally said. You were greedy. You wanted everything: the devoted wife in Denver, the intellectual partner in Boulder, the exciting new romance with Rachel, without consequences, without having to make a real choice. He reached across the table, attempting to take my hand, but I pulled back. Olivia, please. I know I've hurt you, but we had 7 good years together. That wasn't fake. My feelings for you weren't fake. 6, I corrected automatically. He blinked in confusion. What? We've been married for 6 years, not 7. That's according to Diana, who seems to have been keeping better track of your life than you have. A flush crept up his neck. I misspoke. Did you? I leaned forward. Or did you lie about our anniversary date to Diana to keep your timeline straight? Just like you lied to Rachel about it to justify why you hadn't left me yet? The stories are getting tangled, Michael. That's the problem with elaborate deceptions. Eventually, you can't keep all the details straight. For a moment, naked panic flashed across his face, quickly suppressed. This is exactly why we need to talk directly, without lawyers or investigators. Things are being misconstrued, taken out of context. What's the context for a secret apartment? Whitney asked. For a life insurance policy naming another woman as beneficiary? For a pregnant girlfriend? Please, enlighten us. Michael ignored her, keeping his focus on me. Liv, I'm willing to give you everything you want in the divorce. The house, the investments, even my share of the gallery partnership fund. All I'm asking is that we handle this discreetly. No further investigations, no forensic accountants, a clean break that preserves both our dignities. And there it was, the real purpose of this meeting. Not reconciliation or even explanation, but an attempt to halt the legal process that threatened to expose the full extent of his deception. What are you afraid we'll find, Michael? I asked quietly. What else are you hiding? Something shuddered in his eyes. Nothing. I just don't see the point in dragging this out painfully when we could resolve it quickly and move on with our lives. I studied him, this man I had loved, trusted, built a life with. I searched for a glimpse of genuine remorse, some indication that he understood the magnitude of his betrayal. Instead, I saw only calculation, the same strategic thinking that had allowed him to maintain his elaborate deception for years. I'll consider your offer, I said, standing to signal the end of our conversation. But in the meantime, the investigation continues. If there's nothing to find as you claim, then you have nothing to worry about. Michael stood as well, frustration evident in the tight set of his jaw. This isn't what I want, Olivia. I never wanted to hurt you. And yet you did, I replied simply. Repeatedly, deliberately, for years. Your intentions mean very little in the face of your actions. As Whitney and I walked away, I felt Michael's eyes on my back but resisted the urge to turn around. There was a time when leaving him standing alone would have been unthinkable, when his pain would have felt like my pain. Now I recognized that reflexive empathy as part of the problem. My willingness to prioritize his feelings had allowed him to manipulate me for years. Outside, in the bright afternoon sunshine, Whitney squeezed my arm. "You did great in there. Held your ground completely." "He's hiding something else," I said, certainty growing as I replayed our conversation. "Something beyond what we've already discovered." Whitney nodded. "Definitely. That offer to give you everything in exchange for dropping the investigation? Classic guilty behavior." As we walked to her car, I felt my phone buzz with a text. Expecting more pleading from Michael, I was surprised to see Diana's name instead. Michael just called me, extremely agitated. Wanted to know exactly what I told you. "I think you rattled him." A second message followed. He let something slip before I ended the call. Something about Denver not being the only place with records. "Does that mean anything to you?" I showed the messages to Whitney, whose eyebrows shot up. "Records like legal records? Property records? What else would need to be documented officially?" The question hung between us as we drove back to Natalie's house, where I'd been staying since leaving the townhouse. What other official documentation might exist that would concern Michael? What other legal entanglements might he have created that would appear in public records? The answer, when it came to me later that evening, was so obvious I was stunned I hadn't considered it before. What legal record would Michael be most concerned about us discovering? What document would definitively prove the extent of his deception? "A marriage certificate," I said aloud, startling Natalie, who was working beside me at her dining room table. She looked up from her laptop, confused. "You already have one of those." "Yes," I agreed, the pieces falling into place with terrible clarity. "But what if it's not the only one?" "Bigamy?" Natalie stared at me, eyes wide with disbelief. "You think Michael might be legally married to someone else? That's a criminal offense in Colorado." The possibility had hit me like a thunderbolt, explaining both Michael's panicked reaction to our investigation and his cryptic reference to records outside of Denver. It would explain why he's so desperate to stop the financial investigation, I reasoned, mind racing. A forensic accountant would eventually uncover evidence of another legal marriage. "But that's insane," Natalie protested. "How would he even pull that off? Don't you need to show proof of divorce to get remarried?" I shook my head. "Only if the clerk specifically asks for it. Most marriage license applications just require you to state whether you've been previously married, not provide documentation." The more I considered it, the more plausible it seemed. Michael traveled extensively for work. He maintained separate residences, separate social circles. He was meticulous about compartmentalizing different aspects of his life. Was it really such a stretch to imagine he might have formalized his relationship with Diana, or someone else, through legal marriage? I called Whitney, who arrived 20 minutes later with a bottle of wine and a determined expression. "We need to search marriage records," she announced, opening her laptop at Natalie's dining table. "Colorado has a public database, but if he married someone in another state, it gets more complicated." "Start with Boulder County," I suggested. "Given what we know about Diana, that seems most likely." For the next 2 hours, we combed through digital records, searching variations of Michael's name in marriage databases across Colorado. Nothing appeared in Boulder County or any surrounding areas. "Maybe we're wrong about this," Natalie suggested, as Whitney's search of Denver County records also came up empty. "Or maybe he used a different name," I countered, remembering something. "Michael's middle name is Joseph, and his mother's maiden name was Rivera. He used to joke that if architecture didn't work out, he could start over as M. Joseph Rivera." Whitney's fingers flew across the keyboard, inputting the new search parameters. Minutes later, she sat back with a sharp intake of breath. "Oh my God," she whispered, turning the screen so we could see. "Olivia, look at this." There it was, a marriage license issued in Larimer County, Colorado, dated August 15, 2013, 3 years before our wedding. The groom, Michael Joseph Rivera. The bride, Diana Elena Reyes. He's married to Diana, I said numbly, staring at the digital record. Legally married, which means your marriage isn't valid, Whitney finished, her voice gentle, but firm. If he was already married when you exchanged vows, your marriage is void under Colorado law. The implications crashed over me in waves. I wasn't Michael's wife. I had never been his wife. Our entire relationship, from our elaborate wedding to our anniversary celebrations, from our joint tax filings to our shared health insurance, all of it had been built on a fundamental falsehood. I need to call Madeline, I said, reaching for my phone with trembling hands. Wait, Natalie interjected. Are we sure this is our Michael? Could it be someone else with the same name? Whitney clicked through to the detailed record, which included the groom's date of birth and county of residence at the time of marriage. Date of birth matches, and look, residence listed as Boulder County. It's him. My conversation with Madeline was brief, but decisive. She instructed me not to confront Michael directly with this information and promised to expedite our legal processes in light of this discovery. This changes everything, she said, her normally calm voice edged with outrage. We're no longer pursuing a divorce but an annulment, along with potential civil claims for fraud and misrepresentation. And Michael could face criminal charges for bigamy. I hung up feeling strangely hollow. The revelation should have been devastating. In some ways, it was, but it also provided a perverse clarity. The problem hadn't been that I was a bad wife, or that our marriage had somehow failed. The problem was that our marriage had never legally existed in the first place. What about Diana? Natalie asked as I set down my phone. Should we tell her? It was a fair question. Diana had seemed genuinely shocked by the revelation about Rachel's pregnancy. Was it possible she didn't know about her own legal status? Had Michael somehow convinced her their marriage had been annulled or divorced when in fact it remained valid? I don't know, I admitted. Part of me thinks she deserves to know everything, just as I did. But another part feels like I should leave that to the legal process. Whitney's expression was troubled. There's something I don't understand. If Michael was already married to Diana, why go through with a wedding ceremony with you? The legal and financial risks are enormous. One background check could have exposed everything. It was a question I'd been asking myself since seeing the marriage record. Michael was many things: deceptive, manipulative, selfish. But he wasn't stupid. The potential consequences of bigamy were severe. Up to 18 months in prison and substantial fines, not to mention the professional repercussions. His architectural license could be revoked, his career destroyed. Maybe he thought he could get away with it, Natalie suggested. People like Michael often have an inflated sense of their own cleverness. Or maybe, I said slowly, a new possibility dawning, he genuinely didn't believe he was committing bigamy. Both women looked at me questioningly. What if Michael thought his marriage to Diana had ended? I continued, the theory taking shape as I spoke. What if he filed for divorce but Diana never received the papers, or the divorce was never finalized for some reason? That would explain why he wasn't worried about legal records until now, Whitney admitted. If he genuinely believed he was divorced from Diana, he wouldn't have been concerned about marriage certificates showing up in an investigation. It was a more charitable interpretation than Michael deserved, perhaps, but it made a certain logical sense. Criminal bigamy required intent, knowingly entering into a marriage while still legally married to someone else. If Michael had believed himself divorced, the situation became more legally complex, if no less ethically reprehensible. We need to check divorce records, I decided. See if Michael ever filed. Whitney turned back to her laptop, Navigating to the Colorado Court Records database. A search for Michael's name returned several results: routine permits for architectural projects, a speeding ticket from 2015, but no divorce filings. Nothing in Colorado, Whitney confirmed. But if they were married in Larimer County, maybe he filed elsewhere. We expanded our search to neighboring states, knowing Michael frequently traveled to Utah, New Mexico, and Wyoming for work. Hours passed as we methodically combed through accessible public records, finding nothing that suggested Michael had ever attempted to legally end his marriage to Diana. "What now?" Natalie asked as midnight approached, all of us exhausted from the emotional and mental strain of our discovery. "Now," I said, closing Whitney's laptop gently. "We let the lawyers handle it. Madeline will file for the annulment first thing tomorrow, and she'll coordinate with the district attorney's office about potential criminal charges." "Are you going to press charges?" Whitney asked. "For the bigamy, I mean." I hadn't considered that aspect yet. Part of me wanted Michael to face the full legal consequences of his actions, to experience some fraction of the pain and upheaval he had caused. But another part recognized that a public prosecution would drag me into exactly the kind of humiliating spectacle I had hoped to avoid. "I don't know," I admitted. "I need time to process all this." As Whitney and Natalie prepared for bed, I stepped out onto Natalie's small balcony, needing a moment alone with my thoughts. The night was clear and cold, stars pricking the dark sky above Denver's glittering skyline. Somewhere in this city was the townhouse I had shared with Michael, filled with wedding photos of a ceremony that had never been legally valid. Somewhere in Boulder was Diana, Michael's actual wife, unaware that her legal status was about to become central to multiple legal proceedings. And somewhere, I imagined, was Michael himself, perhaps pacing in a hotel room, perhaps sitting in Rachel's apartment, perhaps driving between his compartmentalized lives, frantically trying to contain the unraveling of his elaborate deceptions. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from an unknown number. "Olivia, it's Rachel. Can we talk? It's important." I stared at the message, wondering what new revelation awaited. Had Rachel discovered something about Michael as well? Had he contacted her after our confrontation at the coffee shop? Or was this about her pregnancy, her future, her own need for clarity amid the chaos Michael had created? Before I could decide how to respond, another text arrived from the same number. "Michael's in the hospital. Car accident on I-25. Denver. General. They're saying it's serious." The world seemed to tilt beneath my feet. Despite everything he had done, despite the anger and betrayal I felt, the news of Michael's injury still landed like a physical blow. For 7 years, no, 6, I had loved this man, built a life with him, imagined growing old by his side. Those feelings couldn't simply vanish, even in the face of his extraordinary deception. I texted back with shaking fingers. "Is he conscious? What happened?" Rachel's response came quickly. "Hit a guardrail at high speed. Internal bleeding, broken ribs. He's in surgery now. They're asking for family. Family." The word hung in the air, laden with irony. Who constituted Michael's family? Now? His legal wife Diana? His pregnant girlfriend Rachel? His fraudulent wife? Me? All of us were bound to him through different combinations of legal ties, emotional connections, and shared histories. All of those bonds now revealed as built on shifting sands of deception. I leaned against the balcony railing, struggling to sort through my conflicting emotions. Part of me wanted to rush to the hospital, to see for myself that Michael was alive, to understand what had happened. Another part recoiled at the thought of inserting myself into a situation where I had no legal standing, where I might encounter Rachel or even Diana in the sterile corridors of Denver General. And beneath all of that churned a darker current of thought. Had the accident truly been an accident? Or had Michael, facing the collapse of his elaborately constructed life, made a desperate choice? I went back inside to find Whitney and Natalie, my mind made up. Whatever Michael had done, whatever pain he had caused, I couldn't simply ignore what was happening. Not yet. Not like this. Michael's been in a car accident, I announced, interrupting their conversation. He's at Denver General in surgery. It sounds serious. Natalie stood immediately. I'll get my keys. Are you sure you want to go? Whitney asked, concern evident in her expression. After everything we've learned today? I wasn't sure of anything anymore. Not my legal status. Not my future. Not even my own feelings. But I knew I couldn't stay away. Couldn't spend the night wondering whether Michael would survive. Couldn't leave those questions unanswered. I need to go, I said simply. Not for him. For me. As we drove through the quiet streets toward the hospital, I gazed out at the city lights blurring past, thinking of all the moments that had led to this night. The anniversary dinner, Rachel's fateful call, the discoveries about Diana, the marriage certificate that had unraveled the last threads of what I had believed to be my life. Whatever happened next, whether Michael survived or not, whether he faced legal consequences or not, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Nothing would ever be the same again. And perhaps, when the pain and shock finally subsided, that might prove to be a blessing in disguise. Denver General Hospital hummed with the particular energy of medical facilities at night. Hushed voices, squeaking shoes on linoleum, the steady beep of monitoring equipment. The emergency department waiting room was half full when we arrived, populated by people whose lives had also taken unexpected turns that evening. After identifying myself at the reception desk, we were directed to the surgical waiting area on the 3rd floor. As the elevator doors opened, I immediately spotted Rachel sitting alone in a corner, her blonde ponytail disheveled, her face pale. With worry. She stood when she saw me, uncertainty in her expression. Olivia, she said, her voice hoarse. Thank you for coming. The surreality of the situation struck me anew. Here I was, responding to a crisis call from my husband's pregnant girlfriend, both of us now aware that our relationships with Michael existed in separate compartments of his fractured life. What happened? I asked, keeping my voice low as Whitney and Natalie hung back, giving us space while remaining protectively nearby. Rachel gestured for me to sit. He called me around 9, sounding strange, agitated. Said he needed to see me urgently, that everything was falling apart. I was worried. I've never heard him like that before. So I agreed to meet him at my place, but he never showed. She twisted her hands in her lap. Then I got a call from the hospital. They found my number in his recent calls. Said his car went off the road on I-25, hit a guardrail at high speed. Was anyone else involved? I asked, relief mixing with my concern when she shook her head. Just Michael. The police officer I spoke with said there were no skid marks, no indication he tried to brake. She met my gaze directly. They're investigating whether it might have been deliberate. The possibility hung between us, neither willing to voice what we were both considering, that Michael, facing the collapse of his carefully constructed life, might have chosen a desperate exit. Has there been any update on his condition? I asked, pushing aside speculation in favor of immediate concerns. He's still in surgery. Internal bleeding, multiple fractures, potential spinal damage. Rachel's clinical nurse's assessment broke slightly at the end, emotions seeping through, her professional demeanor. The doctor said it could be several more hours before we know anything definitive. I nodded, settling in for the wait. Natalie and Whitney joined us, making awkward introductions. The 4 of us formed an unlikely vigil group, connected only by our relationships to a man who had systematically deceived us all. After about 20 minutes of tense silence, Rachel spoke again. I should tell you, I called Diana too. I looked up sharply. You know Diana? Rachel shook her head. Not personally. But after our conversation at the gallery, I did some research. Of my own. Found her faculty profile at CU Boulder. I thought she should know about the accident. Is she coming? I asked, unsure whether I dreaded or welcomed the prospect of all three of us converging in this sterile waiting room. She said she would, Rachel confirmed. She sounded shocked. But not just about the accident. Something in her tone made me look more closely at her. What do you mean? Rachel hesitated, then leaned forward. When I introduced myself, explained who I was, she got very quiet. Then she asked if I knew about you. She paused. And when I said yes, that we'd met, she said something odd. She said, "So, you know about the marriage, too." My breath caught. What did you tell her? That I knew he was married to you, yes, but she laughed, this horrible, bitter sound, and said, "No, I mean our marriage, mine and Michael's." Rachel's eyes searched my face. Olivia, is Michael legally married to Diana? Is that even possible? Before I could decide how to respond, the elevator doors opened, and Diana herself stepped out. She spotted our group immediately and walked over, her normally composed demeanor showing strain. Our eyes met in a moment of silent recognition. Two women joined by legal documents neither of us had fully understood until now. You found the marriage record, she said, not a question, but a statement. I nodded. Today. Larimer County, 2013. Rachel looked between us, confusion giving way to understanding. Wait, are you saying Michael is legally married to both of you? No, Diana said, taking the empty seat beside Rachel. He's legally married to me. His marriage to Olivia isn't valid under Colorado law. The blunt statement hung in the air. Whitney moved protectively closer to me, while Natalie looked ready to intervene if the conversation became confrontational. But rather than hostility, I felt an odd sense of solidarity with these women. We had all been deceived by the same man, each of us given a different piece of a puzzle that only made sense when we began sharing our experiences. Did you know, I asked Diana, that your marriage was still legally valid when he married me? She shook her head, fatigue evident in every line of her body. No, I thought we were divorced. Michael told me he filed the papers in New Mexico, where he was working on a project in 2015. Said it was easier there, faster. He even showed me what looked like final decree documents. She laughed humorlessly. I never verified them independently. I trusted him. We all did, Rachel said quietly, one hand resting on her barely visible pregnancy. A doctor appeared in the waiting room doorway, scanning the space before approaching our unlikely gathering. Family of Michael Rivera? We exchanged glances, a moment of silent negotiation before Diana stood. I'm his wife, she said, her legal claim undeniable. Then, with surprising generosity, she added, and these are all family too. We'd like to hear together, please. The doctor, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a serious expression, nodded. Mr. Rivera is out of surgery. We've managed to stop the internal bleeding and stabilize the fractures. The next 24 hours will be critical, but barring complications, we expect him to survive. A collective exhale moved through our group, relief untainted by the complexities of our relationships with Michael. Whatever he had done, none of us had wished him dead. Is he conscious? Diana asked. Not yet. He'll be heavily sedated for at least 24 hours to give his body time to begin healing. I understand there may be complicated family dynamics here, the doctor added, her gaze moving between the three of us with perceptive understanding. But I'd recommend only one visitor at a time once he's allowed visitors, to reduce stress during the initial recovery period. After the doctor left, we sat in silence, processing both the medical update and the increasingly tangled legal and emotional web surrounding us. So, what happens now? Rachel finally asked, looking between Diana and me. It was a question with no simple answer. Medically, Michael would recover, though the extent of long-term damage remained unknown. Legally, a reckoning awaited him: potential bigamy charges, fraud allegations, multiple civil claims. Emotionally, that terrain seemed too complex to navigate in a hospital waiting room at midnight. "My lawyer is filing for an annulment first thing tomorrow," I said, based on the fact that Michael was already legally married when we had our ceremony. Diana nodded. "I'll need to speak with an attorney as well, if our marriage was never legally dissolved." She trailed off, the implications of her status, as Michael's legal wife clearly overwhelming. "And I need to think about my daughter's future," Rachel added, her hand still protectively covering her stomach. "Whatever Michael has done, she deserves to have a father in her life, even if that relationship comes with complications." The three of us sat together, united by the man who had torn our lives apart and brought us together in this strange convergence. Different ages, different backgrounds, different connections to Michael, yet somehow finding common ground in the rubble of his deceptions. Whitney, who had been silently observing our interaction, finally spoke up. "You know what amazes me? How none of you are at each other's throats. In movies, this would be a catfight scene." That unexpected observation broke the tension, drawing tired laughs from all of us. "What would be the point?" Diana asked. "Michael is the one who created this situation, not us. Blaming each other would just give him another victory." She was right, I realized. By maintaining civility, even finding moments of solidarity, we were refusing to play the roles Michael's deception had cast us in. The betrayed wife, the other woman, the pregnant mistress fighting over the scraps of his attention. Instead, we were treating each other with the dignity that Michael had denied us all. "I'm going to head home," Diana decided, standing and gathering her purse. "There's nothing more we can do tonight, and to be honest, I'm not sure I'm ready to see him yet." She hesitated, then added, "I'll be back tomorrow. Would it be helpful if we coordinated visits, shared information?" The suggestion of ongoing communication struck me as both practical and surprisingly comforting. Whatever happened with Michael, it seemed likely that our lives would remain connected in some fashion, through legal proceedings if nothing else. "I think that's a good idea," I agreed. "We should exchange numbers." After we'd shared contact information, Diana turned to leave, then paused. "Olivia, there's something I didn't mention during our meeting at the coffee shop. Something I think you should know." I braced myself for yet another revelation. "What is it?" "Last year, Michael started talking about having children, said he was finally ready, that the timing felt right." She met my gaze directly. "I'm telling you this because I suspect he was having similar conversations with you, and possibly with Rachel as well, before she became pregnant." The confirmation of my suspicion hit hard. Michael hadn't just been juggling separate relationships, he'd been planning parallel futures, with multiple women, making the same promises, offering the same visions of family life to each of us. "He did," I confirmed. "Started bringing it up about 8 months ago." Rachel nodded as well. "He was clear from the beginning that he wanted children. When I got pregnant, he seemed genuinely happy, even though it wasn't planned." Diana's expression hardened. "So we were all supposed to be the mothers of his children, living in separate cities, raising families he would shuttle between while pretending to be on business trips." She shook her head in disgust. The sheer audacity. "It would never have worked," Whitney commented. 3 families? The logistics alone would have been impossible to maintain." "I don't think Michael was thinking that far ahead," I said, understanding dawning. "He lives entirely in the present, managing immediate wants and needs, avoiding conflicts, maintaining enough separation between different parts of his life to prevent exactly what's happening now." "A house of cards," Rachel murmured. "It was always going to collapse eventually." As Diana left and we prepared to follow, I felt a strange sense of clarity emerging from the chaos of the past weeks. Michael's accident had forced a convergence of the separate worlds he had so carefully maintained, bringing together three women who might otherwise never have known of each other's existence. And in that convergence, painful as it was, lay the first steps toward truth, toward healing, toward reclaiming the narratives of our own lives from the man who had tried to write them for us. "Are you coming back tomorrow?" Rachel asked as we waited for the elevator. I considered the question carefully. Did I want to see Michael, lying broken in a hospital bed? Did I need that visual for closure? Or would it simply reopen wounds beginning to scab over? "I don't know," I admitted. "But I'll let you know either way." As we drove back through the quiet streets of midnight Denver, I leaned my head against the car window, watching the city lights blur into streaks of color. For the first time since Rachel's fateful call during my anniversary dinner, I felt something like peace. Not happiness, certainly, but a tentative acceptance of this new reality. Whatever happened with Michael, whether he recovered fully or faced lasting disabilities, whether he was prosecuted for bigamy or escaped criminal charges, whether he atoned for his deceptions or continued to deny responsibility, I knew that my own path forward was becoming clearer. It would not be the life I had planned. It would not be easy, but it would be genuine, built on truth rather than illusion. And after years of living in Michael's carefully constructed fiction, that authenticity felt like the most precious gift imaginable. The gallery was crowded for a Thursday evening, buzzing with conversation and the soft clink of champagne glasses. As Denver's art scene elite mingled around the new exhibition, contemporary female photographers documenting urban transformation, I found a quiet moment by the large windows overlooking the city lights. "Quite a turnout," Catherine said, appearing beside me with two fresh glasses of champagne. "Your curation choices are resonating. 4 pieces sold already." I accepted the glass with a grateful smile. It feels right, doesn't it? These women's perspectives on cities in transition, the destruction and renewal. Catherine studied me over the rim of her glass. Metaphorical, one might say. "One might," I acknowledged with a small smile. It had been exactly 1 year since the anniversary dinner that had changed everything. 1 year of unraveling lies, rebuilding truths, and finding my way forward through unfamiliar terrain. The journey had not been easy, but standing in the gallery that was now entirely mine, surrounded by art I had personally selected to tell stories of transformation, I felt the symmetry of the moment. Michael had survived the accident, though not without consequences. 3 months in rehabilitation for his spinal injury, followed by ongoing physical therapy. The police investigation had ultimately classified the crash as non-deliberate, excessive speed combined with distraction, rather than a suicide attempt. Whether that was the truth, or simply what the evidence supported, I would never know for certain. The legal aftermath had been complex but conclusive. My marriage was annulled on grounds of Michael's existing legal marriage to Diana. The district attorney had initially pursued bigamy charges, but ultimately accepted a plea deal. Michael acknowledged his deception and paid significant fines, but avoided jail time, largely due to his medical condition. The financial untangling had been equally complicated. Despite Madeline's thorough investigation, we never found evidence of additional marriages beyond Diana. What we did discover was a labyrinth of accounts, investments, and property holdings that Michael had carefully segregated between his relationships. The settlement negotiations had been lengthy, but in the end, I received the gallery partnership I had helped build, while Diana retained the Boulder property. Rachel, through separate negotiations, secured child support and medical coverage for her daughter, born healthy and perfect 4 months ago. "There's someone here to see you," Catherine said, interrupting my reflections. "By the entrance." I turned to see Diana standing near the gallery doors, looking elegant in a simple black dress, her dark hair now cut into a stylish bob. I hadn't seen her in person since the final court proceedings 6 months ago, though we had maintained sporadic text communication. "Excuse me," I said to Catherine, making my way through the crowd. Diana smiled as I approached. "Olivia, the exhibition is stunning. Congratulations." "Thank you for coming," I replied, genuinely pleased to see her. Our relationship had evolved into something neither of us could have predicted. Not friendship exactly, but a mutual respect forged in shared experience. "How's Boulder?" "Good. Different. I've taken a sabbatical next semester, going to teach a course in Madrid for 6 months." Her eyes sparkled with enthusiasm. A clean break, new perspectives. I nodded, understanding completely the appeal of reinvention. "That sounds perfect." "And you?" she asked, gesturing around the gallery. "This place is thriving under your sole direction." "It's been therapeutic," I admitted, focusing on female artists, giving voice to different perspectives. It feels authentic in a way my life wasn't for a long time. A comfortable silence settled between us, both aware of the unspoken presence that had brought us together. "Have you seen him?" I finally asked, the question I had been holding back. Diana's expression shifted slightly. "Once, about 2 months ago. He asked to meet, said he wanted to apologize in person." She shook her head, a hint of wonder in her voice. "He actually seemed sincere, Olivia. Broken in ways beyond the physical. The accident, the exposure of everything. It's changed him." I had received similar messages from Michael, requests for meetings, promises of explanations, and apologies. Thus far, I had declined them all, unsure whether confronting him would provide closure or simply reopen wounds that were finally beginning to heal. "And Rachel?" I asked. "Has he been involved with the baby?" "She sends updates and photos. According to our group text, he sees Sophia twice a month, supervised visits for now." Diana's tone was carefully neutral, conveying information without judgment. Our unusual three-way text chain had emerged organically after the hospital vigil, initially as a practical means of sharing updates about Michael's condition and legal developments. Over time, it had evolved into something more, a space where the three of us could process our experiences, warn each other about Michael's attempts at manipulation, and eventually share milestones in our separate journeys of recovery. "Are you still planning to finalize the divorce?" I asked. Diana nodded. "The papers are filed. Should be official by year-end. 12 years of marriage, legal marriage at least, finally over." She glanced around the gallery, changing the subject. "Whitney mentioned you're seeing someone? An artist?" I smiled, thinking of Marcus, a sculptor I had met while curating a public installation 6 months ago. Our relationship was still new, deliberately slow-moving as I relearned how to trust, how to be vulnerable without being naive. "It's early days," I said, "but good, honest." "Honesty," Diana mused. What a concept. We shared a knowing look, the humor dark but healing. "Would you like to see the feature wall?" I offered. "There's a piece I think you'd particularly appreciate, a photographer from Barcelona documenting the reclamation of urban spaces." As we moved through the gallery, I spotted Whitney across the room, engaged in animated conversation with a collector. She caught my eye and gave a subtle thumbs up, both acknowledging Diana's presence and checking that I was okay. I nodded in reassurance, grateful once again for her unwavering support throughout the past year. Later, as the event wound down and the last guests departed, I found myself alone in the gallery, surrounded by images of cities being torn down and rebuilt, structures demolished to make way for new growth. The metaphor was perhaps too obvious, but no less powerful for its clarity. My phone buzzed with a text notification. Michael's name appeared on the screen, still saved in my contacts despite everything. I saw the exhibition coverage in the art section. "Congratulations, Olivia. It looks remarkable. just like everything you create. I know you don't want to see me, but I'm still hoping someday you might be willing to hear what I need to say. Until then, I'm proud of you. Always was. I read the message twice, feeling the familiar complex swirl of emotions that Michael still evoked. Anger, grief, nostalgia, and something else harder to define. Not forgiveness, exactly, but perhaps a recognition that the man I had loved, however flawed and deceptive, had not been entirely fictional. After a moment's consideration, I did something I hadn't done in a year. I replied to him, "Thank you for the kind words about the exhibition. I'm not ready to meet yet, but I'm not saying never. We all need time to become the people we're meant to be." It wasn't absolution, but it was acknowledgement of our shared past, of the pain we had caused each other, of the possibility that healing might someday include conversation. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and moved to shut down the gallery for the night. As I turned off the main lights, leaving only the soft security illumination, I paused to look at my favorite piece in the exhibition. A triptych showing the demolition of an old apartment building, the vacant lot it left behind, and finally, a community garden blooming in the same space. Destruction, emptiness, renewal. My life had followed that same pattern this past year. The demolition had been painful, the emptiness terrifying, but the renewal, that had been entirely my creation, built on foundations of truth and self-knowledge that Michael's deception had ultimately forced me to discover. Walking out into the cool Denver evening, I felt the weight of the anniversary, not of my marriage, which had never been legally valid, but of the moment when illusion had shattered and reality had begun. The pain of that night remained, a scar that would always mark me, but no longer defined me. Ahead stretched a future I was building on my own terms, the gallery expanding under my sole direction, a relationship founded on transparency rather than deception, friendships that had been tested and strengthened by adversity. I thought briefly of Rachel, who had sent a photo of baby Sophia just that morning, tiny fists raised as if ready to fight the world. Of Diana, preparing for her Madrid adventure, reinventing herself at 50. Of Michael, physically diminished but perhaps finally confronting the consequences of his actions, the damage his deceptions had caused. We had all been transformed by the collision of our separate worlds, forced to rebuild from rubble not of our making, but what we built. That was our choice, our creation, our triumph. As I walked to my car, I found myself remembering something my grandmother used to say when I was a child facing disappointment. Sometimes life hands you a gift wrapped in sandpaper. It hurts to open, but what's inside might be worth the pain. The unwrapping had indeed been painful. The discovery of Michael's deception, the unraveling of what I had believed to be my life, the public humiliation of annulment proceedings and media coverage. But what had emerged from that painful process was a woman I might never have become otherwise, stronger, more authentic, unwilling to accept comfortable fictions in place of uncomfortable truths. That night, as I drove back to my new apartment, a light-filled space filled with art and books and no remnants of my life with Michael, I felt something that had been absent for too long: peace. Not the false peace of willful ignorance that had characterized my marriage, but the hard-won tranquility that comes from facing reality, surviving its harshness, and building something beautiful from its lessons. My husband's mistress had called during our anniversary dinner with a devastating truth. He promised to leave you tonight. The promise had been broken. The leaving had been mine instead, and the life that had ended that night had given way to something unexpected but infinitely more authentic. As anniversaries went, it was worth commemorating, not the beginning of a marriage, but the beginning of freedom, not the celebration of a union, but the celebration of discovery, not a milestone of time spent with another, but a marker of the moment I had begun to truly find myself.